And next, the Papal Posse, Robert Royal, Father Gerald Murray are here. But first, some news to share with you. Archbishop of New York, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, announced on Wednesday that one of his auxiliary bishops has resigned in an allegation of sexual abuse of a minor. Here's Cardinal Dolan.
I got some sad news to tell you, and I want you to hear it from me before it goes public, because I owe it to you. I'm your pastor, and you need to hear it from me. Bishop John Jenick, one of my auxiliary bishops and the longtime beloved pastor up at Our Lady of Refuge in the Bronx, he's stepping aside today because of a credible allegation of sexual abuse.
The Archdiocesan Lay Review Board has examined the allegation against Bishop John Jenick and found it credible. Bishop Jenick denies the allegation, but has stepped aside from active public ministry. Pope Francis wrapped up his month-long Synod of Bishops for Youth this past weekend. In the end, the Synod Fathers submitted a 167-paragraph final document. Joining me now to discuss this and much more is editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal, and from Manhattan, canon lawyer and priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray, the Papal Posse. Thank you all for coming together again. 2 weeks in a row. We hardly ever do that, but we're making an exception this time. Now, let's talk about this dance party. At the end of the Synod, there was a rather bizarre scene of cardinals, bishops, and young people dancing together. We'll roll some of this video. I want you each to respond to this. Not that anything untoward was going on, but the optics of this. Robert Royal.
Well, Raymond,
how's that for a lead-in?
I know it is not edifying on television to say I'm speechless,
yeah.
But I have to say I was utterly shocked by this.
Me
And
too.
I was there for every day of the Synod, and I followed, in close detail. But when I saw this at the end, I said, we're supposed to be showing the young people of the world how the Church can lead them through the various uncertainties and difficulties of being a young person in a culture that's falling apart. But I saw this and I said, no, this is maybe the traffic is going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, no. Father Jerry, what did you make of this? And then there was Cardinal Baldessari, who was the Secretary General of this Synod. He sat at the piano and tickled the ivories playing Love Story, of all things. Your thoughts?
Well, this is the trivialization of this whole effort here. Youth culture should not invade the Church with this sense of what really counts in life is entertainment, dance parties, and the like. It would have been much more appropriate if they had said the rosary or did a prayer service or gave thanks to Almighty God. It really is not a good sign that we kind of surrender to this notion that the Church is only relevant when we adopt youth culture as our modus vivendi. It should be the other way around. We should inform young people of the riches of our efforts here, which is to bring people to God through prayer.
Look, I don't have a problem. And some people on Twitter said, well, you're stuck up and you're... Please, I'm from New Orleans. I celebrate Mardi Gras, Halloween. We do the whole thing. Second line with umbrellas. I'm all for that. The question is, at a time when you're dealing with a sex abuse crisis, are the optics right in having cardinals and bishops dancing with young men and women, with the strobe lights going? I'm not sure if that's the greatest image. Nonetheless, I want to move on to some substance. Synodality really took center stage in this final document. Now, this is a form of governance in the Church. The Synod Fathers had considerable opposition to the lines that dealt with this synodality because it was kind of sprung upon them. Tell us, what does this mean, Robert Royal? What is synodality, and why were so many bishops and cardinals upset that this came up so late in the game?
Yeah. Well, I don't know exactly why this was introduced late. It may have been that all along the Holy Father wanted this to be an element, because it's clear that what happened is that he appointed 2 bishops to do those sections on synodality, which are basically the last quarter of the document. I just finished reading the whole document finally.
Oh, lucky you.
And look, synodality could mean just a kind of a loose acceptance of everybody being part of this walking together, which is one meaning of synodos in Greek. But it seems to be something more than that. It seems to be more of a kind of a democratization, a sort of horizontal move that everyone is going to be together in the Church almost on the same kind of level, even though they keep saying there will be people with higher authority and certain, they'll occupy certain offices. But the strange thing about this is the way that this was inserted itself runs contrary to synodality, because synodality means you and I have a respectful dialogue in which we come to agree on what we're going to take the next steps. And instead, this was just inserted in Italian, which a lot of bishops do not even read, let alone speak. They were given a very short period to either approve or not approve this. So it was imposing sort of equality by tyranny, or a kind of an authoritative imposition of something that is supposed to not is supposed to dissipate the centralized authority.
Synodality, as I say, not as I do. Father Murray, your reaction to this, what do you think is the intention here? I mean, clearly no young people were saying, we need a chapter on synodality, Holy Father. That's what the young'uns are really crying out for. Why was this here, in your estimation?
Well, I think this is what's become the experience now of the third synod during the reign of Pope Francis, which is that the document is used to further an agenda which is really not part of the discussion that went on the floor of the synod. Young people are not interested in synodality. They don't know what it means. Quite frankly, I'm not quite sure what it means, because it's rather diffuse. We're talking about a synod of bishops. This is supposed to be bishops getting together, but the focus here seemed to be on synod of everybody. The Instrumentum Laboris was prepared with young people's suggestions. No, there's no problem in doing research, but if the bishops don't talk about synodality on the floor, why is it in the final document? It's obvious. It's the same thing that happened at the first extraordinary synod, where the notion of giving respect to homosexual couples in the church suddenly appeared in the interim document, had never been discussed on the floor, and there was a rebellion against it. So I think what we have here is a use of a document to further an agenda that is not really reflective of what was discussed at the synod.
I want to ask you, Robert Royal, this next question. In this synod chapter, this part of the document, there's a line about certification of websites. I want to put this up on the screen. It says, the synod hopes that in the church, appropriate official bodies for digital culture and evangelization are established at the appropriate levels to manage certification systems of Catholic sites to counter the spread of fake news regarding the church, and looking for ways to persuade public authorities to promote increasingly stringent policies and tools for the protection of minors on the web. Your thought on this? Are they asking for a certification board, if you will, a good housekeeping seal on Catholic websites?
Well, look, in the past we used to have an imprimatur, that a bishop would give his approval that this can be printed, that there's nothing contrary to the Catholic faith.
Those are books, those are written materials, not broadcasts.
These are not broadcasts. Look, as the editor of an online column series, and you as an active broadcast journalist, we certainly want true Catholic doctrine to be transmitted, and false ideas not to be transmitted. But what we hear here seems very funny. It seems like there are certain voices that we're hearing that we don't like, and that we would like to find some way to be able to rein in. I don't think, first of all, that's possible in the age of the internet. But it wouldn't be worrisome if I knew exactly who the censor would be, if it was you or me.
You want a list of the censors, yes.
We would, we'd allow.
I'd love a monarchy where I am king.
But I think, we're just in a world where you're going to have to allow a wide variety of opinions to play out in the public sphere. However, I mean, the Vatican has to respond to fake news, to false news or falsifications.
You deal with false news by putting true news out, and I hate to bring up old memories, but you'll remember it was the Vatican press office that cooked that picture of Pope Benedict's endorsement of Pope Francis's theological virtues. It turns out they edited the letter and took false pictures of it. That's called fake news. Who's going to approve that? Who certified that? So I worry about this. If you want true news, give true news. Be transparent. Respond in the moment. They're doing a better job of that, but hardly.
No, and I think that passage that you read is, like many passages in this document, is very vague, and then they tack on the end. Of course, we want to make sure that young people are not, accessing harmful material. That's unobjectionable, but it gets snuck in there as a way, I think, of validating what is a very vague and not a very appealing idea.
I want to open this up. In the synodality section, paragraph 150, is the most unpopular passage with the 65 Synod fathers who voted against it. It's being criticized as vague language dealing with sexuality. Here it is. There are questions relating to the body, affectivity, and sexuality which require a deeper anthropological, theological, and pastoral elaboration to be carried out in the most appropriate ways at the most appropriate levels, from the local to the universal. Among these emerge those relating in particular to the difference and harmony between male and female identity and sexual inclinations. Father Jerry Murray, your reaction to that? I thought there was already a clear Christian anthropology. What else what are we missing here?
This is bureaucraties. I don't know how they think that this language is going to appeal to young people. You know, this is talking in a way that is abstruse, and then talking about sexual inclination. Christian anthropology teaches that we are sexual creatures, male and female. God made us. So therefore, any inclination that varies from that is not really an inclination, it's a diversion or a perversion even. So vague statements of saying we must accompany people, the question is, where are we going? What are we talking about? Where are we preventing people from going, and if it's in a bad direction? If a young person says, you know, I want to start taking up drug use because I think it's going to help me liberate my mind, we don't walk with that person and say, gee, have you really thought it through? No, we say, look, that's a dead end. Don't go there. It's the same thing with homosexuality in the church. There's too much of this notion of people are made by God to be homosexual, therefore we have to walk with them so they can learn, they can deal with it. That is not Christian anthropology. God made everyone heterosexual, and anything else is a perversion. We have to stay away from it. That's the liberating message. That'll restore confidence.
There's another paragraph here I have to share with you. It reads this way. Robert Royal, I want your reaction to this. The Synod reaffirms that God loves every person, and so does the Church, renewing her commitment against all discrimination of violence on a sexual basis. So all discrimination and violence on a sexual basis. Are you concerned that that might prohibit schools or businesses from firing individuals that may not be living in a moral lifestyle that comports with the owners of that business or with the values of that business?
Yeah, that passage actually echoes the passage in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which uses the phrase all unjust discrimination. And this is, of course, in developed countries, a very sensitive legal distinction that has to be made, because, as you rightly say, if a teacher in a Catholic grade school marries her girlfriend, and the church says, well, we're sorry, you're living a lifestyle that is not consonant with what we believe as a church, our own Supreme Court has upheld, by and large, has held up the right of religious institutions to hire people who are in harmony with their values. This passage is very worrisome to me in the sense that I don't know why that word unjust discrimination is dropped out.
Yes.
But as Father was saying, you just get the sense that there's a kind of a softening of what the teaching is in passages like this. And the odd thing, I want to make this a point because I just finished reading the whole document. The odd thing is, who is this document addressed to?
Right.
Usually it's the bishops meeting as a synod, come up with a document, present it to the Holy Father. However, this time the Holy Father was involved in parts of the drafting, not only through the bishops who wrote the passages on this synodality, but I think in actuality in other passages. So he can't be sending a message to himself. Is it a message to the bishops of the world? Is it a message to young people, as Father was saying? Because they're not going to read the document. I think it was Bishop Barron early on said, look, this is a big and a forbidding and complicated document. Young people just don't read texts like this. So we've got this text in which lots of this stuff has been inserted, and we don't know who it's intended for. I think that a lot of this is going to have to be worked out, but it just seems to me that what we've seen in the previous synods and in some of the ways that different offices at the Vatican have become soft on same-sex attraction, that it's a very worrisome thing.
One more passage, Father Jerry, your reaction to this. It reads, again, that's from that same section in this final document. In many Christian communities, there are already paths of accompaniment in the faith of homosexual people. The Synod recommends encouraging such paths. These paths help people to understand their own personal history, to recognize freely and responsibly their own baptismal call, and to recognize the desire to belong to and contribute to the life of the community, to discern the best ways to achieve it. Your reaction?
This language is very problematic because we know that there are apostolates in the church geared toward people who think homosexuality is a good thing that needs to be embraced. This was Dignity in the United States, which was reprobated by the bishops, and many other different groups exist that are promoting the normalization of homosexuality. There's a wonderful apostle, which is now international, called Courage, and that is an apostle which helps people with homosexual problems deal with it in chastity and in love and in integrated personalities. This sentence that you just read seems to indicate that we believe that there's a group of people who are homosexual and therefore have that identity which then becomes for them the determining value of their life, and that the rest of us have to recognize it. And it's just not the case. Christian anthropology teaches us that heterosexual people may have a problem with homosexual attraction, but that can be dealt with through prayer, penance, and in the case of, where psychological counseling is useful, it can help people realize what's the roots of the fact that I've been diverted from my attraction to the other sex to a sexual attraction to someone of my own. And, right now in the Western world, there's a government effort to suppress that notion because they want to propagate the idea that homosexuality is normal. The church should not fall into that even in a small way. We have to really affirm that people who need God's grace in this particular matter will get it without being told falsely that God made you this way and therefore you should stay this way and that you should be welcomed, and then if you express it in different ways that this is good. I mean, is it unjust discrimination to tell two homosexual men you cannot marry? Is that unjust discrimination? Of course not. That's perfectly normal in Christianity. But in the minds of the homosexual propaganda wing, we're being unfair to those people. That's where the fight is right now.
I want to move on to this. The Pope called the final document the work of the Holy Spirit. He reminded people the Synod is not a parliament, and then he went on to say this. I'll put it up on the screen. It is a difficult time. Constant accusations dirty the Church. Now is the time to defend Mother Church from the great accuser with prayer and penance. This sounds like, again, a reference to Vigano and the Vigano statement. Your reaction to this kind of, using the end of this synod to take a shot at the accuser or the accusers rather than on the guilty parties. Aren't they the enemies of the church?
Yeah, there's no sense of urgency still in Rome. I can tell you one of the things that is very frustrating when you spend time in Italy is that there is no attention in the Italian press or the Catholic press to the
sex abuse
questions,
crisis.
the sex abuse crisis, or the questions raised by Vigano. That they just they think that somehow Americans are puritanical and the American bishops have lost control of their own people, and that this story is a kind of a false one. But in fact, this goes to the heart of the young people were very concerned about the abuse crisis. Now, I get the impression that the Holy Father does feel that there is a growing division within the Church, because he asked all Catholics during the month of October to pray the Rosary, the prayer to St. Michael the Archangel, to offset the tendencies toward division, among us, because there are these different emotions now that are going on. But I think we have to recognize that these emotions don't just exist in a vacuum, that people belong to different factions, that in fact something has happened, not only in the United States, but in Chile, Honduras, Australia, Ireland, elsewhere, and the uncovering of these homosexual networks and the deep pain that's been caused to the Catholic people by their own children being abused by clerics and even by bishops in some cases, as McCarrick and some other cases we know of. this is not going to go away. It's not going to go away inside the church, and it's not going to go away now that secular authorities have interested themselves in it. So, does the devil try to divide the church? Of course he does. But in this instance, the church is going to have to go through a purifying period because there's been such a level of corruption that it simply can't be ignored.
Father Jerry, I've got to bring us up to speed on this latest story that broke this week. Catholic News Service reporting Vatican Nuncio, the former Nuncio, Cardinal Agostino Cacciavillan. He was the nuncio here in the U.S. He claims he knew of rumors, and Rome knew of rumors, about misconduct by Theodore McCarrick going back as far as 1994. Does this seem, to your mind and eye, a vindication of the Vigano testimony, and how damaging are these latest revelations, do you think?
Well, this is showing what many people suspected and what we've discussed, that the matter of Cardinal McCarrick was known and was not acted upon. Now, Archbishop Cacciavillan said that he spoke to Cardinal O'Connor about the matter because Cardinal O'Connor was in the neighboring diocese of New York, and he said that he would be the person to look into it. O'Connor reported back to him that he didn't find the matter to be verified. And then Cacciavillan also said that he did not bring this to the attention of his superiors in Rome. And quite frankly, that was negligent on his part. I'll say it right now.
Yeah.
If you have a report going on about sexual abuse by a sitting archbishop in the United States, and you simply handle it as a matter of, I'll converse with a neighboring bishop, see what he thinks, that's not enough. Now, when the Vatican announced that they're going to study all the archives of the Vatican about the McCarrick matter, that was a good move. It wasn't sufficient, but it's a good move because undoubtedly there have to be other correspondence related to McCarrick that needs to be made public. And I think Bob's point is absolutely correct. This matter should not be handled as a sideshow that will be slowly drips and drabs coming out. The Vatican should set itself a very high standard and say, we will make public all that we know about the McCarrick matter so that we can be held to the same level of accountability that we hold individual diocesan bishops to if there's a problem. The bishop in Wheeling, West Virginia was retired and put under investigation because of a report similar to what McCarrick did. Okay, he is out and he's being investigated. The McCarrick thing is dragging on and on and on. This is not good.
Yeah. Yeah. Bob, I want to pick up on this because there's another story this week. I mean, we heard about Bishop Holly earlier, and something is clearly off in the church's governance as it concerns bishops, transparency. We're seeing some people get passes, others who are engaged in heinous crimes are allowed to sit in power and continue to ordain people and appoint people and suggest people as if nothing's going on. Something is clearly amiss. 60 Minutes broke a story this weekend. A whistleblower, the executive assistant of Archbishop Malone in Buffalo, and one of his priests also spoke on that broadcast. She printed documents, copied documents. Her name is Siobhan O'Connor. And she felt she had to come forward and share those. And then Father Bob Zilio. Here's what they both had to say.
The reality of what I saw really left me with no other option, because at the end of my life, I'm not going to answer to Bishop Malone. I'm going to answer to God.
A lot of cases should have been handled differently. They were not. A lot of cases probably should have gone to Rome at the time. They did not.
How many of those priests should have been taken out of the priesthood?
I would argue at least 8 or 9.
How many of them still are in the priesthood here in Buffalo?
All of them.
Your reaction to this, what are we seeing here? Put this in some wider context.
Yeah, well, I would say that this is the same sort of conscience matter that Vigano felt. That Vigano is near the end of his life. These people are younger, but still there are things that happen in your life, and you have a certain loyalty to the people you work with, and they probably expect a certain confidentiality, but you don't use that personal affection that you have, or the fact that there should be some confidentiality in the church to hide a crime. When a crime has been committed, you have a moral responsibility to come forth. I mean, you first go to your superiors and you ask them to do something about it. But if they don't do it, or they are themselves active in the covering up of something, I think that this is a conscience matter that we may start to see more and more occurring in the church. And you can't say that this is just people attacking so-and-so because they belong to one faction or another. We're getting down to the nub of a very serious abuse inside our own beloved mother church that has, frankly, something to do with homosexuality. The people keep denying that that's an element in it, but this is clearly tied to some elements of homosexuality in the church that haven't been dealt with sufficiently in the past and are going to have to be dealt with in the future.
Yeah, Father, it seems Bob's right. We are seeing these people coming forward out of conscience, whether it's Bishop Holly, Vigano, these whistleblowers in Buffalo. There seems to be a pattern here, and it all points to the negligence of bishops in many cases and the misuse of power. Where does this go?
Raymond, I'll repeat what I said in your broadcast a few months ago. The Holy See needs to appoint a tribunal to come in and investigate every archdiocese and diocese in the country, to go in there with the power to compel the production of documents, to compel testimony from witnesses, and then to produce reports which will identify precisely whether or not these charges against the bishop in Buffalo and in other places are true. Because, quite frankly, after the Boston scandal in 2002, the Vatican did not do very much to investigate whether other dioceses had similar scandals. It was left up to the Attorney General in Pennsylvania and the various district attorneys in that state. Now we have investigations going on in many states. In my own state here in New York, there's an investigation going on. The Holy See should have gotten ahead of this. This is not the way the church needs to operate. We talk about communion in the church. We talk about a church in which we learn from each other. Well, the Holy See needs to understand the people of the United States are absolutely fed up by getting up every morning and reading about another priest or bishop accused because whistleblowers or some civil authority revealed it. Why didn't the church own up to these things originally? This is what I'd like to know. And basically, we need canon law to be fortified. Cardinal Burke has spoken about this, others. Canon law has to be fortified, and mechanisms such as a tribunal to try bishops, that is not ad hoc. It's permanent and it's known. These things need to happen because right now we are wallowing in this mess, and the only answer seems to be coming from outside the church right now.
Yeah, no, it seems to be coming to a head, and Rome is going about business as usual. You know, the Synod, I think, was a kind of glaring and to Americanized shocking visual of complacency, passivity. Father Boniface Ramsey, who was one of the early whistleblowers against McCarrick, by the way, came out this week, and in an op-ed in Commonweal, he said the McCarrick thing was a failure of fraternal correction. But I think he's underplaying that, honestly. But he also talked about a glaring lack of initiative in the face of horrible, terrific, tragic events unfolding in the United States. And Rome is doing very little. They have to clearly step up and do something soon, or they will lose swaths of the Catholic people, the confidence of those people in the United States. And that's not being an accuser. That's simply stating reality and wanting to save the church as it stands today and its moral voice.
Yeah, I think that in one way, Rome could at least deal with some of these earlier problems that cropped up in the McCarrick case. What kind of mechanisms took place? And this predates Francis. This is, the controversies swirling around Francis can be put.
Well, this obviously goes back to the reign of John Paul II.
Right. These can be bracketed a little bit for the time being. But there's something. I agree with Father entirely. We need a structural change here. We need an institutional change that is going to recognize that there's an internal dynamic that has gone wrong, and it is going to find some way to hold people accountable in the future. And we know that there are many other cases that are going to be coming out, and this is going to be an embarrassment unless the church makes a move. Right now, I see almost no desire to do that in Rome. I talked with a lot of people while I was over during the Synod about these other questions as well, and it's utterly shocking to me that they don't recognize how important this is for the future of the church and the kind of impact that this has about the view that people have of Pope Francis here in the United States and elsewhere.
No, it speaks to the moral credibility of the moral voice of the Church in the United States and the world. It's that important. My worry is, again, we're focused on the dying ember of Theodore McCarrick. When you have major infernos underway in Buffalo and other parts of the United States and the world, and everybody just looks the other way and they're having a dance party and ratifying documents in Rome. I think to the Catholic people, that visual is unacceptable. And I don't know how much longer they will accept that without ramifications. Before I go, we have to address a very disturbing development in communist China. Authorities destroyed 2 Marian shrines this week, ostensibly because they were lacking the necessary building permits. Now, this is just after a month. It was only a month ago the Vatican signed a deal with Beijing over the appointment of bishops. There seemed to be a rapprochement. Father Jerry, what are we seeing here?
Welcome to the world of communist duplicity. Communist China has zero interest in the promotion of Catholicism in that country. They have total interest in controlling the Catholic Church. The Holy See, and sad to say the Holy Father, have fallen for a typical communist trick, which is to pretend that they're on your side and then to do the exact opposite. This is an absolute disgrace, this agreement that was made with the Chinese Communist government, precisely because it undercuts what we have taught people for years, that fidelity to the Holy Father comes before anything else, and the Catholics in China were faithful to that. Now that these churches have been destroyed, where is the protest from the Holy See about this? Where is the vigil in St. Peter's Square to pray for our communist Chinese, the victims of communist Chinese persecution among the Catholics and others? I mean, where is the urgency here? We've seen this trick so many times in history. It was done in Eastern Europe, and now in communist China. We are subject to that. The communist Chinese government that just destroyed 2 shrines, they're the ones nominating the bishops that are going to rule the church in that country, and the Holy Father has a veto power over it. That is one of the worst possible ideas you could come up with. And I have to say, Raymond, I'm glad you have covered this story so well. The Catholic media should wake up. This is what's happening in Cuba, Venezuela, Nicaragua. When these type governments persecute the church, we lose big time, and it's not good. We should resist this with some prophetic force.
Yeah, no, well, we've featured Cardinal Zen over many years and have been focused on this. I'm just heartbroken that we're seeing this play out. Robert Royal, you too have covered this in the sad history of the martyrs in China. What does this tell us? And the fact that we had a Chinese bishop invited to the synod, you were there for this, and he comes in, he's feted. We find out after the fact, not only is he a bishop, he's a voting member of the Communist Party. He actually votes in the parliament there against his own people that he's supposed to represent morally and spiritually. Your thoughts?
Well, you know, there's an old phrase that we used to use during the Cold War. Father Murray and I actually were together in Cuba when John Paul II was there, and we saw this live ourselves. We used to talk about the DNA of communism, it's the same absolutely everywhere. They destroy churches. There's this duplicity, you know, and whatnot. Now, the funny thing about that, there were 2 Chinese bishops. That it seems, from what we can gather, that the Chinese government told the Vatican that it was going to send these 2 guys to the synod. And of course the Vatican had to say, well, yes, and they can only come if they're invited. So then they were invited after they were told. But one of them, then they both, after a week or 2, decided they had to go back to China because of prior commitments. So, you know, how much they're engaged with the fact of the church and how much they're doing the bidding of the government, it's pretty clear.
They already got their orders and listened to the room. Right. Enough. Right. Back to the mainland. Right. I'm going to leave it there. Robert Royal's commentary, as well as Father Jerry Murray's commentary, is always available at thecatholicthing.org. Papal Posse, thank you both for being here.